It was a Tuesday morning, calm and ordinary, or at least it should have been. The sunlight streamed through the kitchen window as I brewed my usual cup of coffee, the smell of French roast wafting through the house. Claire, my wife, was already out the door, headed to work at the marketing firm where she handled major client accounts. Our 2 kids had just boarded the school bus, leaving the house in rare silence. I sat down at the dining table, half-heartedly scrolling through emails on my phone. That's when it happened. A brown envelope lay on the corner of the table, nearly obscured by the morning paper. I wasn't sure why it caught my attention. It looked like any other package, but something told me to pick it up. No return address. Curious, I slid my finger under the flap and peeled it open, revealing a neatly folded piece of paper and a glossy photo. I unfolded the letter first. People aren't always who they claim to be. The truth is closer than you think. Start with the jewelry. My breath hitched. Jewelry? What jewelry? I hadn't bought Claire anything recently, and as far as I knew, neither had she. With growing unease, I turned to the photograph. It was a picture of Claire exiting what appeared to be a high-end jewelry store downtown. She was holding a small white bag in one hand and talking on her phone, a smile that seemed secretive curving her lips. I sat there, paralyzed by the possibilities. What was she doing buying expensive jewelry without telling me? Was it meant to be a surprise for me? Perhaps an anniversary gift she'd been planning early? Or was this something else entirely? I needed answers. I pulled out my laptop and navigated to the jewelry store's website, jotting down the contact information. My fingers trembled as I dialed the number. A polite woman answered after 2 rings, her voice smooth and professional. "Thank you for calling Sterling Jewels. How may I assist you?" Cleared my throat. "Hi, my name's Jack. My wife made a purchase there recently, and I was hoping you could confirm the details of the order. It's important. It may have been a mistake on our account." After a brief hold, she returned. "Yes, we do have a record of that. The purchase was made 6 weeks ago. A custom bracelet with an engraved charm." My stomach twisted. "Can you tell me what the engraving said?" There was a pause. "I'm afraid that information is private, sir." Of course it was. But it didn't matter. My gut already told me the answer wasn't one I wanted to hear. The bracelet wasn't for me. And if it wasn't for me, I hung up the phone and sat back, staring blankly at the kitchen ceiling. This could be innocent, I told myself. Claire could have bought the jewelry for a friend, a family member, anyone but another man. But deep down, I knew the seeds of doubt had already been planted. That evening, I watched her carefully. She was cheerful, just like always, helping the kids with their homework while I made dinner. Nothing seemed out of place. But now, every smile she flashed felt rehearsed. Every laugh seemed forced. Before heading to bed, I checked our shared bank account. Sure enough, there it was, a $3,000 withdrawal from her personal savings, dated the same day as the jewelry purchase. I closed the laptop and lay down next to her, my mind spinning with questions. Was I imagining things? Jumping to conclusions? Or was my wife hiding something far worse than I ever could have imagined? The next morning, I woke up before Claire, which wasn't unusual. She liked to sleep in a bit on Wednesdays since her first meeting wasn't until 9. I, on the other hand, couldn't stop my mind from racing. Lying there, I tried to convince myself it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe she'd tell me about the bracelet today, and I could laugh at myself for overreacting. But something in me knew that wasn't going to happen. By the time I was downstairs, the smell of coffee brewing had become my morning lifeline. I sat at the kitchen island, scrolling through our family's shared calendar on my phone. Claire had a client dinner scheduled tonight. I had seen it pop up earlier in the week, but hadn't paid much attention until now. She had meetings all day, according to the schedule, but what stood out was a blank spot between 3 and 5 p.m. Claire was a meticulous planner, and it wasn't like her to leave gaps in her work schedule. The bracelet was still on my mind, gnawing at me. I thought about calling the jewelry store back and pressing them for details, but what good would that do if I couldn't prove who the gift was for? Instead, I decided on a different approach. If I could track where she was going after work today, I might start piecing things together. I grabbed my old laptop and logged into a tracking app one had installed on Claire's phone years ago. We'd both agreed to it after a scare with our youngest child wandering off at the mall. It was meant for emergencies, but now, it felt like I was crossing a line. Still, my finger hovered over the locate device button. I hesitated, guilt flooding through me. But then I thought of the $3,000 bracelet and the possibility that my wife had secrets far darker than I ever imagined. I pressed the button. Her location popped up instantly. She was at the office, as expected. I closed the laptop quickly as I heard her footsteps coming down the stairs. "Morning," Claire said, smiling as she walked into the kitchen wearing a fitted navy blue dress. I noticed she'd spent extra time on her makeup again, something she'd done more often lately. "Morning." I tried to sound normal, casual. "You're up earlier than usual." She shrugged. "Figured I'd get a head start today. We've got a big presentation for a new client, and I want everything to be perfect." I watched her as she poured coffee, wondering how many lies could fit between the spaces of her words. Did she rehearse them in her head? Or was she so good at this by now that it came naturally? "What time is the client dinner tonight?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. 7. "Don't wait up. I'll probably be back late." I nodded, sipping my coffee to avoid saying anything that would give me away. When she leaned over to kiss me goodbye, I caught a whiff of her perfume, the same one she wore on date nights with me. My heart twisted. I wanted to believe that the woman I'd shared my life with for the past 12 years wasn't capable of doing this to me, to our family. But the evidence was stacking up, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. Once she was out the door, I reopened the tracking app. I'd keep an eye on her movements throughout the day, especially during that mysterious 3 to 5 p.m. gap. If she was meeting someone, I'd know soon enough. The day dragged on, each hour feeling longer than the last. I worked from home, but I couldn't focus. I kept refreshing the tracking app, half expecting her location to jump to some unfamiliar address. But until 2:55 p.m., she stayed exactly where she said she'd be, at work. Then, just as I was about to convince myself I'd been wrong, the location updated. She was on the move. I watched as the little dot representing her phone left her office and headed downtown. My pulse quickened when she stopped at a coffee shop. That didn't seem suspicious, until I realized it was only a block away from the jewelry store where she'd bought the bracelet. I couldn't sit still anymore. Grabbing my car keys, I made a snap decision to follow her. When I arrived downtown, I parked a few blocks away and walked toward the coffee shop, keeping my distance. I scanned the street but didn't see Claire anywhere. My mind raced. Had I missed her? Was she meeting someone inside? Or had she already left? I was about to head inside when I spotted her across the street. She wasn't alone. Claire stood on the corner, laughing at something the man next to her had said. He was tall, with dark hair and a tailored suit that screamed money. My breath caught in my throat as I watched her lightly touch his arm, a gesture I recognized as something she used to do with me. They started walking together, heading toward a hotel entrance just a block away. My stomach dropped. No, this wasn't happening. I felt frozen to the spot, unable to move as I watched my wife disappear through the revolving doors with another man. The same man, I realized, from the background of a photo I'd seen weeks ago, the one taken at her office holiday party. I didn't know his name, but that didn't matter. I'd found what I was looking for, or at least the beginning of it. As I turned back toward my car, my mind buzzed with questions. Who was he? How long had this been going on? Was this just a business meeting? Or something much worse? I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew one thing for certain. Claire wasn't where she said she'd be. And tonight, when she came home, I wasn't going to pretend everything was okay. I didn't sleep much that night. Claire came home just before midnight, smelling faintly of wine and perfume. Her cheeks flushed as if she'd had the perfect evening. I stayed in bed, pretending to be asleep as she slipped quietly into the room, undressed, and crawled under the covers next to me. The warmth of her body should have been comforting, but it felt like a betrayal. I lay there, wide-eyed, staring at the ceiling until I heard her breathing even out, signaling that she'd fallen asleep. My mind replayed the scene from earlier, Claire walking into the hotel with that man. their laughter, the way her hand had lingered on his arm. By morning, I knew what I had to do. While Claire got ready for work, I acted like nothing was wrong. I made breakfast for the kids, packed their lunches, and kissed them goodbye as they ran to catch the school bus. Meanwhile, Claire sipped her coffee at the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone. "You're quiet this morning," she said, looking up at me. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, just tired." I forced a small smile, though I could feel my jaw tightening. "Did you enjoy dinner last night?" "Oh, it was great," she said, completely unfazed. "We went to that new place downtown, La Belle Époque. The food was incredible." I nodded, gripping the handle of my coffee mug a little too tightly. I'd driven by that restaurant on my way home last night. It had been closed. She was lying. Again. "Well," she said, setting her cup in the sink, "I've got a long day ahead. Don't wait up tonight either. There's another client dinner." She kissed me on the cheek before grabbing her bag and heading out the door. The second she was gone, I sprang into action. I called in sick to work and drove downtown, parking near the hotel where I'd seen Claire the day before. My plan was simple. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them by sitting at home. I walked into the lobby, the scent of expensive cologne and freshly brewed coffee hitting me instantly. The place was sleek and modern, with marble floors and minimalist decor. I scanned the room, trying to appear casual as I approached the front desk. "Hi," I said to the receptionist, a young man with neatly combed hair and a polite smile. "I'm here to pick up something my wife left behind. She checked in yesterday under Claire Mitchell." He tapped on the keyboard, his fingers moving quickly. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited for him to confirm her name. But then, to my surprise, he frowned. "I'm sorry, sir, but I don't have any record of a Claire Mitchell checking in." I blinked, caught off guard. "Are you sure? Maybe she was listed under a different name." He shook his head. "No Claire Mitchell, no Mitchell at all." I was about to walk away when a thought struck me. I leaned back over the counter. What about a reservation made by a James or a David? I didn't know the man's name, but I figured it was worth a shot. The receptionist hesitated before typing again. This time, his face shifted into a look of recognition. "Yes, we had a reservation yesterday under a James North. He checked out this morning." "Did he check in alone?" I asked, trying to sound nonchalant. "I'm afraid I can't share those details." I bit my tongue and gave a polite nod before turning toward the exit. My head buzzed with frustration and suspicion. If Claire hadn't checked into the hotel herself, it meant she was likely there as his guest. And if he'd checked out this morning, then they'd been there overnight. I climbed back into my car and sat there, gripping the steering wheel as I tried to figure out my next move. I couldn't confront her yet, not without undeniable proof. So far, all I had were assumptions and half-truths. I needed something concrete. That's when it hit me. The bracelet. If the engraving on the bracelet revealed something personal, like the man's initials or a message meant for him, I'd have my proof. And I knew exactly how to get it. I drove straight to Sterling Jewels and parked a block away, hoping the woman I'd spoken to on the phone yesterday wasn't working today. My plan was risky, but I didn't care. I needed answers. When I entered the store, the smell of leather and luxury hit me. Glass cases displayed everything from diamond rings to platinum watches, and soft classical music played in the background. A woman with short brown hair and a friendly smile greeted me. "Welcome to Sterling Jewels. Can I help you find something special today?" "Yes," I said, forcing a smile. "Actually, my wife was here a few weeks ago and purchased a custom bracelet. There was an issue with the engraving, and she asked me to come by and make sure it's correct." The woman nodded, her heels clicking against the polished floor as she led me to a computer behind the counter. "What's your wife's name?" "Claire Mitchell." She typed it in, then smiled. "Ah, yes, the bracelet was a beautiful piece. One moment while I pull up the details." My heart raced as I watched her click through the files. After a few seconds, she turned the screen toward me, revealing a digital copy of the engraving.
Toyoten, forever yours, CM.
I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me.
Yoten.
It had to be him, James North. I thanked the woman, barely registering her polite response, and stumbled out of the store. The fresh air hit me like a punch to the gut, but it did little to clear the storm raging in my head. This wasn't just some harmless misunderstanding. My wife had bought an expensive, custom bracelet for another man. A man she'd spent the night with at a hotel. There was no more denying it. Claire was cheating on me, and now I had the proof I needed. I sat in my car outside the jewelry store, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The engraving on the bracelet replayed in my head like a broken record. To JN, forever yours, CM. Forever yours. It was a final, gut-wrenching confirmation of everything I'd been trying to deny. Claire wasn't just having a fling. This was emotional, deep. She'd written forever. My stomach churned at the thought. I had spent over a decade building a life with her, raising 2 kids, sharing dreams, and working hard to give her everything she needed. And she had thrown it away for him. I didn't drive home right away. Instead, I parked near the lake where Claire and I used to take the kids when they were little. I stared out at the water, trying to calm my racing thoughts. But the more I tried to collect myself, the angrier I became. The lies, the deceit, the gall to come home and kiss me goodnight while she whispered sweet nothings to another man. I wasn't just angry, I was humiliated. I wanted to confront her. I needed to confront her. But something told me that rushing in without a plan could backfire. I'd seen enough of those messy divorce stories online to know that confronting a cheater without solid leverage could leave you blindsided. I wasn't going to let that happen. I pulled out my phone and called the one person I knew I could trust. Ron showed up at the bar 30 minutes later, sliding into the booth across from me. He was my best friend since college, the kind of guy who could make you laugh even when your world was falling apart. But today there was no joking. The second he saw my face, he knew something was wrong.
Jesus, man.
You look like you've been hit by a truck. Feels like it. I took a sip of my beer and slid the photo of the bracelet engraving across the table. He picked it up, his brow furrowing as he read it. What is this? It's a bracelet my wife bought for her boyfriend, I said, my voice flat. She's been cheating on me. Ron stared at the photo for a moment, then let out a low whistle. Damn. You sure? I nodded. I saw her with him yesterday. They went into a hotel together. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair.
I am sorry, Mom.
I didn't see this coming. Neither did I. I rubbed my temples, feeling the weight of everything crashing down on me. I don't know what to do, Ron. Do I confront her tonight? Do I wait? Do I get a lawyer first? Ron thought for a moment, then leaned in, lowering his voice. Listen, you've got proof, but you need more if you want to come out of this with your dignity and your assets intact. If you confront her now, she could lie, twist the story, or worse, turn the kids against you. You need to be smart about this. I nodded slowly, realizing he was right. My emotions were screaming at me to storm into the house and demand answers, but that would give Claire the upper hand. I needed control of the narrative. Okay, I said. What do you suggest? First, hire a private investigator, Ron said, leaning forward. Let them follow her and document everything. You want evidence, dates, locations, photos, the works. Something you can hand to a lawyer and say, this is why I'm done. I hated the idea of dragging this out, but I knew it was the right move. And after that? Get a lawyer, Ron continued. A good one. You've got kids and assets to protect. If she's willing to cheat, she might be willing to screw you over in court. I exhaled, running a hand down my face. This is a nightmare. I know, man, but you've got this. Stay calm, stay smart, and don't let her see you coming. I nodded, feeling the first shred of clarity I'd had all day. Thanks, Ron. He clapped me on the shoulder. You know I've got your back. Whatever you need. When I got home that evening, Claire was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of pasta while our daughter sat at the table coloring. The smell of garlic and basil filled the air, but it didn't comfort me like it usually did. Everything felt different now, like I was watching my life from the outside. Hey, Claire said, smiling when she saw me. How was your day? Busy? I replied, forcing a smile as I kissed her on the cheek. She didn't flinch. No sign of guilt, no hesitation. She played the role of the perfect wife so flawlessly that if I didn't know better, I would have believed her. But I did know better. And that smile, that kiss, they weren't real anymore. We ate dinner as a family, but I barely tasted the food. My mind was spinning with the plan Ron and I had put together. First thing tomorrow, I'd contact a private investigator and get the ball rolling. I'd gather the evidence I needed to protect myself. And when the time was right, I'd confront Claire with everything. After dinner, Claire and I tucked the kids into bed, just like always. She held my hand as we walked down the hall, leaning her head on my shoulder. "I love you," she whispered as we stood outside our bedroom. The words stung more than they should have. "I love you too," I replied, my voice barely audible. I didn't know how much longer I could keep this act up, but I had to, at least until I had everything I needed to end this on my terms. I barely slept that night, tossing and turning while Claire slept peacefully beside me, completely unaware that her carefully crafted web of lies was beginning to unravel. By morning, I was running on pure adrenaline and a couple of cups of strong black coffee. Today was the day I would take control. After the kids were off to school, and Claire had left for work, I grabbed my phone and called the private investigator Ron had recommended. His name was Nathan, and according to Ron, he was one of the best in the business. "Hello, Nathan speaking," came the gruff but professional voice on the other end of the line. "Nathan, this is Jack Mitchell. Ron Hayes referred me to you. I need your help." There was a brief pause before Nathan responded, his tone shifting to one of understanding. "I'm sorry you're going through this, Jack. Let's meet. My office is downtown. How soon can you be here?" "Give me 30 minutes, I said, already grabbing my car keys. Nathan's office was tucked inside an older building that smelled faintly of leather and stale coffee. The walls were lined with bookshelves and framed photos of Nathan shaking hands with police chiefs and city officials. He looked exactly like the kind of guy you'd want in your corner. Mid-50s, salt and pepper hair, and eyes that had seen it all but still managed to be empathetic. We sat across from each other at his desk, and I explained everything. The bracelet, the hotel, the lies. Nathan listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting down notes. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against his notepad. "You've got a good start with the bracelet and the hotel," he said. "But if you want an airtight case, we need more. I'll set up surveillance on Claire immediately, photos, timestamps, the whole package. I'll track her movements, document who she's meeting, and gather evidence you can take to a lawyer." I nodded. "How long do you think this will take?" "It depends on how careful she's being," Nathan said. "But if she's as comfortable lying as you've described, it won't take long. Cheaters tend to get sloppy once they think they're in the clear." I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded again. "Okay, do whatever it takes." Nathan handed me a folder. "Here's the contract. Sign it, and I'll get started today." I signed without hesitation. This wasn't just about catching Claire in the act. It was about protecting myself and my kids. That evening, Claire came home as if nothing had changed. She kissed me hello, helped the kids with their homework, and laughed at the dinner table like we were still the perfect family. I played along, but inside I was numb. Every word she spoke felt like a lie. After dinner, as she loaded the dishwasher, I watched her closely. How long had she been living this double life? How many times had she looked me in the eyes and lied? "I have to head into the office early tomorrow," she said, drying her hands on a towel. "We've got a meeting with a new client." "What time?" I asked, trying to sound casual. 7:30, she replied. "I'll probably leave around 6. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. But inside, my mind was spinning. If she was lying about this too, Nathan would catch her. The next few days passed in a blur of tension and suspicion. I went through the motions, working, helping the kids, sleeping next to Claire, but my mind was constantly on Nathan's investigation. I checked my phone obsessively, waiting for an update. Finally, on Friday afternoon, Nathan called. "We've got something," he said. My heart pounded. "What did you find?" She met him again yesterday. Same guy from the hotel. They had lunch at a cafe downtown, then checked into a hotel room around 2 p.m. They didn't leave until after 5. I closed my eyes, the confirmation hitting me like a punch to the gut. I had known this was coming, but hearing it out loud made it all too real. There's more, Nathan continued. We followed her today too. She didn't go to her office this morning. She went to his place. I gripped the phone tighter. His place. Yeah. I've got photos of her going inside and staying there for over 2 hours. Couldn't breathe. My entire body felt like it was on fire, the rage and betrayal bubbling to the surface. Did you get pictures of them together? We got everything you'll need, Nathan assured me. I'll put the report together tonight and send it over first thing tomorrow. But Jack, you should know. This isn't just a fling. From what we've observed, it looks serious. Serious. The word echoed in my mind, tearing through me like a knife. Thanks, Nathan, I said, my voice hoarse. I'll be in touch. I hung up and sat in the living room, staring blankly at the wall. The house was quiet. The kids were at a friend's house for a sleepover, and Claire was out running errands. But the silence felt suffocating, like it was pressing down on me, daring me to finally confront the truth. I couldn't pretend anymore. I had everything I needed to confront her. The question was, when? Saturday morning arrived with the kind of quiet that felt too heavy, too loaded with tension. The kids were still at their sleepover, and Claire was in the kitchen making pancakes, humming softly to herself. The smell of butter and maple syrup filled the air, but I couldn't enjoy it. Not today. Nathan's report was in my email. I hadn't opened it yet. The weight of it burned in my chest like a ticking bomb waiting to go off. I needed to confront her, but I wasn't ready. Not until I knew exactly how I wanted to play this. Breakfast is ready, Claire called from the kitchen, her cheerful voice grating on my nerves. I forced myself to join her at the table, where she had set out plates stacked with pancakes, butter, and syrup. She smiled as she slid a plate in front of me. I made extra since the kids aren't here, she said. I stared at her, wondering how she could act so normal. Did she feel any guilt? Did she lie awake at night, torn apart by what she was doing to our family, or did she fall asleep next to me without a second thought? You okay? She asked, her brow furrowing slightly. Yeah. I lied, cutting into my pancake. Just thinking about work. She seemed satisfied with that answer, turning her attention back to her food. I barely ate, each bite tasting like cardboard. My phone sat in my pocket, the weight of Nathan's report like a physical presence I couldn't ignore. After breakfast, Claire kissed me on the cheek and said she was heading out to run some errands. I'll be back in a few hours, she said, grabbing her purse. As soon as the front door closed behind her, I pulled out my phone and opened Nathan's email. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the report, my eyes scanning the photos and timestamps. There were pictures of Claire and James North at the cafe, sitting close, laughing, holding hands. Another photo showed them entering the hotel, her arm hooked around his like they were on some kind of romantic getaway. The final photo was the worst. It showed Claire standing on the balcony of James's apartment, wearing a robe that wasn't hers. The timestamp showed she had been there early that morning, on a day she told me she had a client meeting. I felt like the walls were closing in on me. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a complete dismantling of everything I thought I knew about my life. I slammed the laptop shut and buried my face in my hands. For a moment, I let myself feel the weight of it all. The anger, the sadness, the humiliation. But then I forced myself to breathe. I couldn't afford to be emotional right now. I had to be strategic. I dialed Ron's number. Jack, he answered. What's up? I have the proof, I said, my voice cold and steady. All of it. Photos, timestamps, everything. Ron let out a low sigh.
I am sorry, Mom.
I really am. What's your next move? I'm going to confront her, I said. But I need to make sure she doesn't see it coming. I want to control the narrative. Ron was quiet for a moment. Do you want me to be there when you do it? I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me.
No.
This is something I need to do alone. But I might need your help after, depending on how it goes. Got it. Just say the word. I hung up and stared at the clock on the wall. Claire would be home in a couple of hours. That gave me enough time to go through the report again and decide exactly how to confront her. When Claire walked through the front door that afternoon, she was carrying grocery bags, her face flushed from the cold. She smiled when she saw me sitting on the couch. Hey, I got everything we need for dinner tonight. I didn't smile back. Can we talk? I said, standing up. Her smile faltered. Sure. What's up? I gestured toward the kitchen, and we sat at the table, the same place where we'd shared so many meals as a family. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just stared at her, wondering how we had gotten to this point. What is it? She asked, her tone cautious now. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, scrolling to one of the photos Nathan had taken. I slid it across the table toward her. It showed her and James sitting close at the cafe, her hand resting on his. Claire's face went pale. Jack, don't, I said, cutting her off. Don't lie to me. I know everything. She stared at the photo, her hands trembling as she tried to find the right words. It's not what you think. Don't insult me, I snapped. I have photos of you going into his apartment. I know you've been meeting him at hotels. I even know about the bracelet you bought him. Forever yours. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. Jack, please. How long? I demanded, my voice rising. How long have you been seeing him? She looked away, wiping her eyes. 6 months, she whispered. 6 months. My stomach twisted. She had been living this double life for half a year, and I had been too blind to see it. Why? I asked, my voice breaking. Was I not enough for you? Was our family not enough? Claire shook her head, sobbing now. It wasn't about you. I don't know how it happened. I didn't mean for it to get this far. I laughed bitterly. You didn't mean for it to get this far. But you bought him a bracelet with the words, forever yours. Sounds like you knew exactly what you were doing. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. For a moment, I thought about the good years we'd had together, the life we had built, the kids who were upstairs oblivious to the fact that their world was about to be turned upside down. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. I want you to pack a bag and leave, I said. Go stay with him if that's what you want. But you're not staying here. Jack, please, let's talk about this, she begged, reaching for me. I stepped back, avoiding her touch. It's too late for that, Claire. You made your choice. With that, I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her sobbing at the table. I closed the bedroom door behind me and leaned against it, my heart pounding as Claire's sobs echoed faintly from the kitchen. For a moment, I stayed there, eyes shut, fighting the urge to scream. Every fiber of my being wanted to rage, to destroy something, anything, that would ease this crushing pain. But I couldn't afford to lose control. Not now. I took a deep breath and grabbed my phone, dialing Ron. He picked up on the second ring. How'd it go? She admitted everything, I said, my voice flat. 6 months. She's been seeing him for 6 months. There was silence on the other end before Ron finally spoke.
I am sorry, Mom.
What now? She's packing a bag, I said, glancing toward the bedroom window where I could see Claire's car parked in the driveway. I told her to leave. She can stay with him for all I care. Ron sighed. Do you want me to come over?
No, Irraplia.
I just need some space. But thanks for offering. We hung up, and I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. It wasn't until I heard the sound of Claire's suitcase wheels bumping down the hallway that I stood up and made my way to the front door. She was standing there, her coat on, her suitcase by her side. Where are the kids? She asked, her voice hoarse from crying. At a sleepover, I said, my tone cold. She nodded, biting her lip. I'm sorry, Jack. I really am. I didn't respond. What was there to say? Sorry wasn't going to fix this. Sorry wasn't going to undo 6 months of betrayal. I'll call the kids tomorrow, she said, her eyes pleading for some form of understanding. I opened the door and gestured for her to leave. "Don't forget your bracelet," I said, the words dripping with venom. She flinched, tears spilling down her cheeks as she grabbed the suitcase and walked out. I stood there watching her until she disappeared down the street. The sound of her car engine fading into the distance was the most deafening silence I'd ever heard. I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it, the weight of the moment finally crashing down on me. I slid to the floor, burying my face in my hands. For the first time since this nightmare began, I let myself cry. I woke up on the couch, my neck stiff and my mind groggy. The sun was just starting to rise, casting a soft orange glow across the living room. For a moment, I forgot everything that had happened. But then the memories came flooding back, and the knot in my chest tightened. The kids would be home soon, and I needed to figure out how to explain things to them. They deserved the truth. Well, a version of the truth that wouldn't shatter their innocence. But before that, I had to make another call. I grabbed my phone and dialed the lawyer Nathan had recommended in his report. Vanessa Harper, a divorce attorney with a reputation for being ruthless when it came to protecting her clients. "Vanessa Harper's office," a receptionist answered. "This is Jack Mitchell," I said. "I need to schedule a meeting with Ms. Harper. It's about a divorce." After a few clicks of a keyboard, the receptionist replied, "We have an opening at 10 a.m. today. Can you make it?" "I'll be there," I said. Vanessa's office was sleek and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline. She greeted me with a firm handshake and led me into her office, where we sat across from each other at a glass desk. "Tell me everything," she said, her voice calm and professional. I handed her Nathan's report, and she flipped through it, her expression neutral. When she reached the photos of Claire and James, she let out a small sigh. "This is solid evidence," she said, closing the folder. "You've done your homework." "I want to protect my kids and my assets," I said. "Whatever it takes." Vanessa nodded. "We'll start by filing for divorce on grounds of infidelity. Given the evidence, we can push for favorable custody arrangements and minimize any financial impact on you. But I need to know, does she have access to any joint accounts or assets that she could drain?" I thought about it for a moment. "We have a joint savings account, but most of the money is in my name. The only large sum she has access to is her inheritance from her parents." "Good," Vanessa said. "First, we'll freeze any joint accounts to prevent her from pulling a fast one. Then we'll serve her the papers. I'll make sure everything is airtight." "What about the kids?" I asked. Vanessa leaned forward, her gaze steady. "We'll aim for primary custody. If she tries to fight it, we'll use the evidence to show the court that her decisions have been reckless and not in the children's best interests. But based on what you've told me, I don't think she'll fight too hard. She seems like she's in over her head." I nodded, the weight of her words settling over me. This was really happening. My marriage was over, and now it was just a matter of legally dismantling what we had built together. "Thank you," I said, standing up. Vanessa shook my hand. "We've got this, Jack. Stay strong." The kids came home that afternoon, full of stories about their sleepover. I forced myself to smile and nod, pretending like everything was normal. But when they asked about Claire, my stomach twisted. "She's staying with a friend for a little while," I said, keeping my tone light. "We're just figuring some things out." They seemed to accept that answer, but I knew the day would come when I'd have to tell them the truth, or at least part of it. For now, I just wanted to protect them from the chaos that was brewing beneath the surface. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat in the living room and stared at the wedding photo on the mantel. It felt like a relic from another life, a life that no longer existed. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let Claire's betrayal destroy me.
Ide Rabuil. Ide Hal.
And when this was all over, I'd come out stronger. The days blurred together after Claire left. I operated on autopilot, waking the kids up, getting them to school, going to work, and making dinner. I was there physically, but mentally, I was trapped in a fog of betrayal and confusion. Every time I saw her empty side of the bed or passed by the framed photos in the hallway, I felt the sting of what she'd done all over again. She texted me once, asking if we could talk, but I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Vanessa had filed the divorce papers, and Claire would be served any day now. I didn't care how she reacted. My focus was on the kids and making sure they didn't feel the cracks forming beneath their feet. On Wednesday morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. It wasn't an alarm, it was a call. I groggily reached over, squinting at the screen. Nathan's name flashed across it. My heart skipped a beat. "Hello," I answered, sitting up and rubbing my eyes. "Jack, you're not going to believe this," Nathan said, his tone urgent. "What is it?" "We've been following James north. I wasn't planning to bother you with more updates, but something's come up. He's meeting with another woman." I frowned, trying to process what he was saying. "What do you mean?" "He's cheating on Claire." "Looks like it," Nathan said. "We've got photos of him and this woman entering a hotel together. Different hotel this time. They've met up twice in the past week." "I thought you should know." I sat there stunned. James was cheating on Claire. The man she had thrown our marriage away for was betraying her, too. The irony wasn't lost on me, but instead of satisfaction, I felt nothing. Maybe a little bit of pity. Claire had gambled everything on him, and now she was getting burned. "Thanks for letting me know," I said. "Do me a favor, keep documenting it. I don't know if I'll need it, but it can't hurt." "Will do," Nathan replied. "Take care, Jack." I hung up and sat on the edge of the bed, staring out the window. The sun was just starting to rise, casting a soft golden light across the room. I should have felt vindicated. I should have been laughing at the poetic justice of it all. But instead I felt empty. By the time I got the kids ready and dropped them off at school, my mind was still spinning. What did this mean for Claire? Would she come crawling back, begging for forgiveness now that her fantasy with James had crumbled? Would she finally admit she'd made a mistake? I wasn't sure I cared. Later that evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, the doorbell rang. My heart jumped, and for a moment, I thought it might be Claire. But when I opened the door, it wasn't her. It was Ron holding a six-pack of beer. "Thought you could use some company," he said, grinning. I chuckled, stepping aside to let him in. "You have no idea." We sat on the back porch, the cool night air refreshing against my skin. The stars were out, and the sounds of crickets filled the silence between us. Ron cracked open a beer and handed it to me before opening one for himself. "So," he said after taking a sip, "how are you holding up?" "Honestly," I exhaled, "better than I thought I would be. The kids keep me grounded." "That's good," Ron said. "And what about Claire? You heard from her?" I nodded. "She texted me once. I ignored it." "Smart move." He paused, looking at me carefully. "Nathan told me about James." I smirked, shaking my head. "Of course he did. He's good at keeping people informed." Ron chuckled. "It's wild, though. She cheated on you for a guy who's cheating on her. That's karma right there." "Karma's a funny thing," I said, swirling the beer in my hand. "But you know what's crazy? I don't even care that he's cheating on her. I thought it would feel good to know she's getting a taste of her own medicine, but it doesn't. I feel indifferent." "That's not crazy," Ron said. "It just means you're done. When someone breaks you like that, there comes a point where you stop caring what happens to them." I stared out at the yard, the moonlight casting soft shadows across the grass. "I think you're right. I don't hate her, but I don't love her anymore either. I just want this chapter closed." Ron raised his beer. "To closing chapters, then." I clinked my bottle against his. "To closing chapters." We sat there for a while longer, talking about everything and nothing. For the first time in weeks, I felt a little lighter, like I could breathe again. The next day, the papers were served. Claire called me, but I didn't pick up. Couldn't. I wasn't ready to hear her excuses or apologies. Instead, I went for a run, letting the cool morning air clear my mind. When I got back, there was a voicemail waiting for me. Her voice sounded broken, like she'd been crying for hours. "Jack, please. I need to talk to you. I know I've hurt you, but James isn't who I thought he was. I made a mistake, and I stopped the voicemail before she could finish. I didn't need to hear the rest. I already knew where this was going. She wanted forgiveness. She wanted to come home. But this wasn't her home anymore. I deleted the message, grabbed a glass of water, and sat down at the dining table. The morning sunlight streamed through the window, warming my face. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of clarity. Claire had made her choice, and now I was making mine. There was no going back. Not this time. I wasn't just closing this chapter. I was starting a new book. The days that followed were eerily calm. Claire didn't call again, didn't text. Maybe she'd gotten the message, or maybe she was simply giving me space. Either way, I didn't care. The silence was peaceful, and for the first time in weeks, I could focus on the kids, on work, and on piecing myself back together without her shadow looming over me. Vanessa sent over updates regularly. The divorce was moving quickly, thanks to the overwhelming evidence on my side. Claire hadn't contested any of the terms, at least not yet. I half expected her to pull some last-minute stunt, but so far, she'd been cooperative. Maybe she thought that by playing nice she could win back some sympathy. So she was wrong. One evening, I was helping my son with his science project when the doorbell rang. I told him to finish labeling the diagram, wiped my hands on a kitchen towel, and opened the door. Claire stood on the porch. Her face was pale, her eyes red and puffy, like she hadn't slept in days. She looked fragile, like the wind could knock her over. For a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated, gripping the doorframe. Part of me wanted to shut the door in her face, but I knew that wouldn't solve anything. With a sigh, I stepped aside and let her in. We sat in the living room, an awkward distance between us. The air was heavy, filled with unspoken words that neither of us wanted to be the first to say. "I've been thinking," she began, her hands nervously twisting in her lap, "about everything, about us." "Don't," I said, my voice firm, "don't come here hoping for forgiveness, Claire. You made your choice." Her eyes filled with tears. "I know, but I didn't know it would end like this. James, he wasn't who I thought he was. He was seeing someone else the whole time. I feel like an idiot." "You're not an idiot," I said, leaning back against the couch. "You're just selfish." The words hung between us, sharp and final. She flinched, but she didn't argue. "I thought I was missing something," she said after a moment. "That maybe he could give me what you couldn't. But it wasn't real. None of it was real. And now you want to come back?" I asked, my tone laced with bitterness. "Now that you've realized the grass wasn't greener, you expect me to welcome you with open arms?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks.
No.
"I know it's too late. I know I destroyed everything. I needed to tell you I'm sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve that." I exhaled, rubbing my hands over my face. "You're right. You don't." We sat in silence, the only sound her soft sobs. For years, I had loved this woman with everything I had. I had built a life with her, trusted her, and believed we were a team. And now, here she was, a broken version of the woman I once knew, asking for forgiveness I wasn't sure I could ever give. "I loved you," I said quietly. "I would have done anything for you, Claire. But you didn't give me a chance. You threw it all away without even telling me you were unhappy." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. "I know. I hate myself for it. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that she truly regretted what she'd done. But even if she did, it didn't matter anymore. The damage was done and we couldn't go back." "I don't hate you," I said, standing up. "But I can't love you anymore either." Claire looked up at me, her eyes wide and filled with pain. "I understand. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for," I said, walking toward the door. I opened it and gestured for her to leave. She stood up slowly, wiping her tears away. As she walked past me, she paused for a moment, as if she wanted to say something else. But then she shook her head and stepped outside. I watched her get into her car and drive away. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the weight lift off my chest. This time it was over for good. I closed the door and turned around, the quiet house greeting me like an old friend. There was still work to be done. Papers to sign, explanations to give to the kids, and healing to do. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally free. Tomorrow I'd wake up and start fresh. Not as the man Claire had broken, but as the man who had survived. The morning was crisp, the kind that reminded me of fresh beginnings. I stood in the backyard with a cup of coffee, watching the golden light spread across the lawn. The kids were still asleep, and the house was silent in a way that felt peaceful rather than lonely. It had been a month since I watched Claire drive away for the last time. The divorce papers were signed, the assets divided, and custody arrangements finalized. Claire hadn't fought me on anything, not after seeing how firm I was. She'd quietly accepted the terms, and we'd moved through the process with as little drama as possible. But that didn't mean it had been easy. There were nights when the house felt too big, when I missed the routine of having her there, even if I knew that version of our life had been an illusion. But the ache was fading. Day by day it hurt a little less. I'd taken the kids to therapy, something Vanessa had recommended to help them process the changes. They didn't know all the details, only that their mom and I were no longer together because sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. They had questions, of course, especially my oldest, but I answered them carefully, focusing on stability and love. When the sliding door opened behind me, I turned to see my daughter, her hair messy from sleep. She padded out in her pajamas and climbed onto the chair beside me, resting her head against my arm. "Morning, princess," I said, kissing the top of her head. "Morning, Daddy." We sat there in comfortable silence, watching the sun fully rise. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't consumed by anger or betrayal. I was here in this moment with the person who mattered most. I hadn't heard from Claire since our final conversation, and I didn't expect to. Ron had mentioned that she'd moved into a small apartment on the other side of town and was keeping to herself. Part of me wondered if she was struggling with her decisions, but I knew it wasn't my problem anymore. Later that afternoon, Ron showed up unannounced, a box of pizza in hand. "Figured you could use some company," he said, grinning as he set the box on the kitchen counter. "Always," I replied, grabbing plates. The kids ran into the kitchen, their laughter filling the air as they begged for slices. For a while it felt like old times. Friends, family, and simple joys. After the kids went outside to play, Ron leaned against the counter and crossed his arms. "You seem better." "I am," I admitted. "I didn't think I would be, but I am." "That's good to hear," he said. "You deserve it." We sat on the back porch again, like we had that night when everything was falling apart. But this time the air felt lighter. "I'm thinking of taking the kids on a road trip," I said. "Something simple, just us. Maybe hit a few national parks." Ron raised his beer in a mock toast. "Now that's the Jack I know. Getting back to living." "Yeah," I said, exhaling. "It's time." As the sun began to set, I watched my kids chase each other around the yard, their laughter echoing into the evening. I realized that, despite everything, I hadn't lost everything. I still had them. I still had a life worth living. Claire's betrayal had broken me, but it hadn't destroyed me. And as I sat there, watching the last rays of sunlight disappear behind the trees, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The storm had passed, and the future was waiting. I was ready.